Hello, my name is Jesse Dukes, and one of my favorite things are the songs and the life story of Jimmy Buffett.
Welcome to the Finding Favorites podcast, where we explore your favorite things without using an algorithm. Here's your host, Leah Jones.
Hello and welcome to Finding Favorites. I'm your host, Leah Jones. It's Sunday, September 24th. This episode I recorded with Jesse Dukes a couple weeks ago before Rosh Hashanah. And then I started the new year off super busy. I hosted Rosh Hashanah dinner for the first time since I had cancer and since before COVID. I had like 40 friends over and I cooked. I baked challah for the first time since I've had cancer. I cooked dinner for my friends. I had people over. Now, I won't pretend I managed it all by myself. When my friends started showing up at 5, they were like, Leah, sit down and tell us what you're trying to do. Because did I overdo it hosting dinner? Yes. Could I have hosted dinner a year ago? I couldn't. 6 months ago, I couldn't. And this was really such a turning point for me and my health and my strength to have been able to have people over and to like cook the main dish and bake challah from scratch. Like I haven't been able to do any of that since I was diagnosed with breast cancer in 21. And because of COVID, was restricted from having people over at all. So 5784, which is the Jewish year, the Hebrew year we are in, is off to a really great start. And then this week ended with I went to the Cubs game yesterday, my first game, also probably since COVID. Before COVID, my sister and I went and took my parents and her kids, and that was my dad's first trip to Wrigley Field. And a couple days ago, a friend texted and said, hey, do you want to use my tickets on Saturday for the Cubs game? And it was the most beautiful day. The Cubs won. It was really fun. And then we took a pedicab to Southport to get dinner. Like it was just really a very lovely day. And now it is Sunday. It's Erev Yom Kippur. So in 8 hours, I'll be at synagogue for Kol Nidre. Tomorrow I'll be giving a speech as president of my synagogue. I have not written the second draft of that speech, and I am very anxious about it. My apologies to the people who sent me edits on the speech 4 weeks ago. I just can't get it together. But I did take my ADHD medicine this morning. So hopefully I'll be able to write a second draft before I go to synagogue tonight. So this episode is really a fun one. Jesse Dukes from Upper Middle Brow joins me to talk about Jimmy Buffett. And it's a really fun conversation. We talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly about Jimmy Buffett. We wrestle with his legacy, and talk about lyrics. And it's a fun conversation. And I would say, especially if you don't think much about Jimmy Buffett, not that you think poorly of him, but you just haven't considered Jimmy Buffett. Jesse makes the case for caring about Jimmy Buffett's music. So it is a fun episode. And in the next couple weeks, I've got Taylor and Michael on to talk about filmmaking. I've got B. Vargas on to talk about powerlifting as a woman, and also pageants and powerlifting. Ray Dokson is we're gonna meet up at some point soon and do an interview. So lots of great interviews in the works. And I hope you enjoy this conversation with Jesse Dukes. Also, this weekend, I got my flu vaccine. In 2 weeks, I'm going to go and get my COVID booster. I did flu vaccine first because I am too immunocompromised to get them on the same day. So I did flu vaccine first, and then I'm going to do COVID in a couple weeks. There's an RSV vaccine that's been approved for people over 60. That is a brand new vaccine. It's based on the science of the COVID vaccine. It's really an exciting time for vaccines. So please go get your booster. It's available to everyone. I believe everyone over the age of 12, possibly 6 months. It's a little unclear. The CDC is not super clear on that. But please go get your booster and wash your hands, wear your masks, and keep enjoying your favorite things. Hello and welcome to Finding Favorites. I'm your host, Leah Jones, and this is the podcast where we learn about people's favorite things and get recommendations without using an algorithm. It's fall, which means I don't know why this means it's fall, but it's guests are returning. And I am really excited to have Jesse Dukes back on the podcast today. Jesse is the co-host of Upper Middle Brow podcast and has been living his best life on the open road this summer. And he's back to talk about Jimmy Buffett, among other things. So, Jesse, how are you doing tonight?
I am great. Really excited to be back. Excited to talk about Jimmy Buffett. Still a little bit sad that we lost him just a few weeks ago.
Yeah. Before we get into the Margaritaville of it all, you guys are now like 29, 26 episodes in?
29. As of today.
Yes. I was listening to the episode on Necromancer earlier, realizing that I think I may have had Necromancer and Cryptonomicon overlapped in my head for a long time.
That figures. I can see that. And I should say it is, I made this mistake many times too. It is Neuromancer. Not necromancer, although the word necromancer is one of the sources for the term neuromancer, and they are similar words. They are both kind of like one word, sort of foundational cyberpunk texts. Neuromancer, though, is 10 years older than that, and it's William Gibson, and I'm pretty sure that William Gibson, even though he's only a little bit older than Neil Stephenson, was a major influence on Neil Stephenson too. And it's interesting because Neil Stephenson is actually a computer guy, he programs computers, he knows code and stuff like that. And William Gibson, when he wrote Neuromancer, which imagined this future world with like the virtual reality internet and people stealing things from computers and computers that are coming to life perhaps and all of these other sort of computer-based things, he did not know how to use a computer. He typed it on a typewriter.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And he was famously, well, actually, I'm not going to tell you this. He
typed it, or did he write it longhand and the woman in his life typed it for him?
No, he did not. He did not Wendell Berry Neuromancer. He did type it. I think I believe it was even a Smith Corona typewriter. I believe but I could be wrong about that. That's just one of like two brands that I know that make typewriters. So that might be why I'm saying that.
Yeah. So I've not read it, but I do think for a long time I couldn't. I would probably say like Cryptonomancer.
Or like they're very different stories, though. Yeah. I think that there's a good chance that anybody who's read one has read the other, so I completely get that, and they're sort of foundational in that sense, but they're very, very different, and they have a very different tone, and they have a very different mood. Neuromancer, well, I don't know. People should listen to our episode of Upper Middle Brow. But Neuromancer, to me, what I did not realize, I'd read it before, but what was really clear when I read it this time is how much of a noir it is. Just like how much in the tradition of, Dashiell Hammett or, I forget the other famous guy from the Raymond Chandler, or, something like Chinatown, or the French director Jean-Pierre Melville. like that kind of criminal underworld story. It's that kind of story. It just happens. He just imagines it in a kind of imaginary future. And, his imagination of the future at the time, people were like, oh, this is so prescient. This guy's, he's not that prescient. It's nothing like the actual future, but it's a wonderful, I don't know if you ever hear the term retrofuturism, which is kind of like an appreciation for what people used to, an appreciation for what people of the past thought the future would be like.
So like when people are like, where are flying cars
Yes.
from the Jetsons? I think the Jetsons get a lot of it.
Jetsons get a lot of it, yeah. And actually, William Gibson has a great short story called The Gernsback Continuum about a character who starts hallucinating all these kind of Art Deco-y futuristic things like flying wings and people walking around in togas and glass skyscrapers and like all sorts of great like images that you might see on a Chicago terracotta skyscraper, like above the doorway. It's a weird story. But yeah, I would say Neuromancer is retrofuturistic, and the future it imagines does not really appear to be coming true, except for the thing he does imagine in a really creepy way is the paranoia around artificial intelligence, and that's what the book's about. And he probably was one of the first people to be writing about that. Although also the next book we are about to read and talk about on Upper Middlebrow, Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep by Philip K. Dick, which was made into the movie Blade Runner. And so we've done our Neuromancer tapings, and we're going to be taping Androids, as we call it for short, like this week, I think, too. And that's another great foundational cyberpunk text and another neo-noir. Yeah.
Do you feel like you and Chris are stronger in your definition of what is upper middlebrow now that you've done you're 29 episodes in?
I don't know that the definition has gotten any stronger, or because it really, functionally, it's whatever we want to talk about is upper middlebrow. And I think I may have told you this the last time you asked me this, is that for me, it's almost more of a verb that for me, the kind of picking apart of popular works of fiction and craft is kind of the upper middlebrow, and it doesn't necessarily matter what level of craft the book, whether it fits neatly on the upper middlebrow shelf. But I think we have the same definition. I think the thing that we have really done since we last talked to you is we've gotten, I think, more confident with our format, and we've gotten more confident and fluid about just kind of going with it and seeing what we discover. And I'm talking up our show. I think it's fun. I like our show a lot, and what I really like are the moments where we discover something, or we're sort of surprised, or we surprise each other. Sometimes we disagree, or sometimes one of us points out something that the other one didn't notice, or asks an interesting question, or even, asks a question that allows us to kind of arrive at some new understanding of something in the moment. And those are always my favorite, bits from upper middlebrow. And I think we don't know what it's going to be. You don't know what's going to be surprising,
right?
Or it wouldn't be surprising, but we almost always stumble upon something like that. And I think we've kind of chilled out a little bit and learned to sort of trust that if we go in with some interesting questions and some thoughts and some readings prepared, something cool will happen.
Right. And also that your chemistry is going to come across. Like it is as much fun as like a hang podcast as it is a literary podcast.
Thank you.
Because I do not read the books. I don't keep up with you guys.
And that is totally fine.
Yeah. Although I think I'm on my second or third of the summer reading list.
Yeah, I saw you posting that on social media. Yeah, and The Space Between Worlds. Did you read?
Yep. A couple weeks ago, I listened to The Space Between Worlds, and that was like, there was not a single twist I saw coming. Every single time I was surprised. But I don't try very hard. Like I am someone who's going to like scream on a roller coaster because I want, I don't want to be too smart for the book.
Yeah.
So I just like didn't see it coming ever.
Yeah.
And it was really fun. And now I'm listening to Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow, which is, have you read it yet?
No, it was Chris's recommendation, and I loved that section that he read from it, but I have not read it yet.
It's a fabulous Gen X coming of age story.
Yeah.
And it's also, there are very rarely male-female friendships that are like not will they, won't they? Like, so that they have a pair of best friends who are a man and a woman, and it is not like there's lots of tension and drama, but it's not sexual tension. You never see that represented in pop culture.
Yeah.
And I have really enjoyed that because I was like, oh, this is like describes a lot of the friendships I have in my life that there's not a lot of words for.
Yeah. And you can still have fraught and evolving relationships.
Yeah.
You know, between two opposite sex heterosexual people, you know, who you know, there's no element of will they, won't they.
Yeah.
You know, they are friends. Like, that is the box, and that can still be a really fascinating and, you know, challenge. I mean, sometimes those relationships are challenging for different reasons, and I'm racking my brain and try to think of good examples of friendships like that, and I think you're kind of right. It seems like romance always interests. I mean, When Harry Met Sally is like the famous example of this, right? Which is like they have a good friendship and then they try romance, and that makes it, you know, I actually haven't seen the movie, so I don't want to spoil it for myself.
How is that possible?
I don't know. I also just watched The Breakfast Club for the first time.
Yeah. When Harry Met, I mean, I felt like when I saw it in college, I felt like I was coming to it late. So it's
well, it was, you know, I think we're about the same age, and I think it was kind of an adult movie for me when it came out. And
absolutely.
And I think same thing with The Breakfast Club is that it's a teenage movie when I was like 4 or something like that.
Right.
So it felt like a movie for another generation. So then you'd have to actively kind of catch up with it at some point. And, you know, I'm always catching up, you know, I'm constantly catching up.
I will just say that in the director's commentary, the first cut of the movie had the opposite ending.
Oh, wow.
And the test audiences were so angry at Nora Ephron that she had to recut the movie. So just know that going in, that she didn't want the ending that made it to screen.
That's very, very interesting. Well, I will watch it one of these days, I'm sure.
Yeah. Awesome. So now we had kind of tabled a conversation on kids whose best friends are robots.
Yes.
That's a future conversation.
Yep.
Because unfortunately, Jimmy Buffett passed away about 2 weeks ago. He had a private battle with, well, actually, I think it was, if you were in, people who were in the know seem to have known he had cancer. It doesn't seem like it was a secret. It just seems like I maybe was ignorant.
I didn't know about it. I think he had canceled some tour dates though. So if you were a super fan and you had tickets, you heard that he canceled some tour dates for health reasons. But I'm not sure. I think even people who knew that were not expecting the announcement that he died. I think it was a Friday night about 2 weeks ago. You know, and I think that seemed like that came as a surprise and shock. And I had not heard he was sick. And the last I had sort of seen of him was this really wonderful video series that his daughter directed of him telling stories and performing some songs during the pandemic in quarantine, where he looked great, you know, mid-70s, but just like healthy and energetic. And so to me, it came as a real shock because he struck me as somebody who was aging really well and retained a lot of his youth and energy, you know, into his 70s. If anything, looked healthier in his 70s than he had looked in a while, you know, like he kind of cleaned up his act a little bit, I think. And, you know, so you'd see him surfing an 8-foot wave, at age 70, a photo, or swimming or snorkeling or something like that. And so it was shocking to me anyway.
Yeah. So, yeah, right. It was the Friday of Labor Day weekend, which a lot of people said was like a very Jimmy Buffett way to go.
Yep.
Right before a 3-day weekend.
Yep.
So you got in touch right away and you're like, actually, I'll come back and talk Jimmy Buffett.
Well, I didn't inform you that I would be coming on your show. I did ask.
You pitched yourself to return.
Yes. It felt more urgent than the Robot Friends thing. And that's still in the back of my mind, but I'm still thinking about that one. And I also still need to see Mithrigan.
Mithrigan, yes.
Mithrigan. So, yes, I suggested that we talk about Jimmy Buffett because, I wanted somebody to talk about it, and because I had a lot on my mind, and I have gone through my own journey of discovery with discovery. I've gone on my own journey of discovery with Jimmy Buffett, and then I've also gone through some complex feelings about his legacy and about aspects of his life, and particularly his business entity and his brand, that I find kind of distasteful and harmful, but also come to really love his songwriting and kind of his life story too. And that's been recent for me, within the last 10 years or so.
Yeah. So let's, I always like to time travel with my guests to what do you remember as your first significant exposure to Jimmy Buffett?
Gosh, it's funny. I think I can remember an exact moment in middle school where we were doing a English class study of popular culture. It was in the sort of honors English class. And so our teacher asked us to say what's cool and what's uncool. And this was very anxiety producing for me because I felt that I was uncool in middle school. And, I was somebody who wore, kind of hand-me-down clothes and was not, maybe not kind of a little professor kid, and I don't mean I was the kid of professors. I meant that I was kind of nerdy and not very attenuated to what was in style and what was popular. And middle school is just like that, period. It's brutal. And so teachers don't ask kids to talk about what's cool and what's not cool in middle school. That was a bad assignment. But I remember one of the more popular kids said Jimmy Buffett. And of course, he could get away with saying that because he was popular.
Right.
And people sort of laughed. And I remember thinking, who's Jimmy Buffett? And, I think probably, I don't remember if we were listening to music or something, but I think I probably encountered Cheeseburger in Paradise in that moment.
Yeah.
And thought, this is a fun novelty song. I don't know if it's cool or not. I don't particularly like it. I don't particularly dislike it. But then I had a frame for Jimmy Buffett. And I think I saw a photo of him in that class where he's wild long hair and his 70s mustache and a big grin, playing the guitar, maybe with a parrot on his head or a Hawaiian shirt. And I was like, wow, this guy just embodies a kind of complete fearless expression of the cheesy excesses, the corny excesses of the 1970s, the decade that we were emerging from. It felt like nothing, I didn't feel like there was anything threatening or evil about it, but just kind of any moment where you'd want to slap your palm and be like, Dad, just was completely embodied in Jimmy Buffett, just the corniest, dad jokingest making, goofy looking white guy dressed in the most tacky way possible, from an era that was excessive in its tackiness, was kind of my first impression of Jimmy Buffett.
I'm trying to think of when did I realize he wasn't like Weird Al?
You're right. He was in the same box as Weird Al for me, and Ray Stevens.
Yeah.
Ray Stevens, who did this streak and had, in the 80s, you'd be watching TV and there'd be a Ray Stevens, call now and get the Ray Stevens album. And he's got the Ring Around the Bathtub and some other stupid song and some other goofy song. And Jimmy Buffett felt like he was of that kind of, and to be fair,
I'm sure some of them were on. I'm sure Dr. Demento had to play Jimmy Buffett.
Probably he did. And Jimmy Buffett he has always had a certain percentage of his songs. Like if you look at every Jimmy Buffett album, I would say, I'm guessing, I don't know all of his albums, but many of them have at least one novelty song. You know, like Why Don't We Get Drunk and Screw?
Yes.
Pencil Thin Mustache. Einstein Was a Surfer, which is actually I kind of like that song from a recent album. It's I mean, maybe it's just because it mentions surfing and I'm obsessed with surfing, but yeah, so he does, and some of his hits were novelty songs too, and Cheeseburger in Paradise is a novelty song. Although, like many of his songs, it is more than it appears to be.
Yeah.
If you look at it a little bit closely.
And then you mentioned that you dated a girl who sincerely liked Jimmy Buffett.
Mm-hmm.
And that started to change your opinion?
Yes.
Or was like more exposure?
Well, I dated a girl pretty recently, like within the last 10 years, who was a serious fan. I would say in between then, there was more exposure. And I would have told you, say in my 20s or 30s, that he's got a couple good songs,
Right.
And I can remember maybe being 18 or 19 and driving in the backseat of my grandparents' car. And we had gone, I don't remember why I was with my grandparents, but I was staying with them for a few days. And we had gone to my uncle's house, and we were driving back through the country roads outside of Blacksburg, Virginia. And I don't know, they were probably listening to the Easy Listening station, and Margaritaville came on, and I recognized the bass line, and I noticed that my grandmother was singing along with the chorus, and he's got the tagline, the last line of the chorus is this evolution from, some people claim that there's a woman to blame, but I know it's nobody's fault. And the next time he sings it, it could be my fault. And the final time, it's my own damn fault.
Right.
Which I think is actually what makes that song, again, a little bit deeper than you first realize. And I noticed my grandmother was singing along, and it was a moment of like, oh, there's something going on here. This guy is got, there's a depth to this that I hadn't really noticed, because my grandmother was not a folk music or pop, even like a rock and roll. She wasn't somebody who would like Jimmy Buffett for his genre,
Okay, right.
She was like, she listens to like Mitch Easter and Glenn Miller, but there was something about that song that had roped her in, and she was smart, and so that was a moment. And then I remember hearing A Pirate Looks at 40 at some point and just being like, whoa, that is a dark song and a beautiful song. And so I'd say by the time I was in my mid to late 30s, I was at the point of like, oh, Jimmy Buffett's better than people give him credit for.
Yeah.
I was already there. And then, yes, I had a girlfriend who was from Miami, who had very, very deep memories of, being picked up by her dad at school in his Jeep Cherokee, and the tape that was always in the Cherokee, and 1993 was Son of a Sailor, that album. And just like all of those songs were imprinted on her. And then, we took a few trips to Florida. And when you go to Florida, including Key West, but anywhere in Florida, Jimmy Buffett, it's like, I can't even think of who this would be in Chicago. Like some combination of like Harold Washington and like Al Capone. Like, the sort of beloved, iconic figurehead,
Right.
I sometimes refer to him as Senator Buffett in that context. You'll just go into, it's just constantly the music's playing, and you see, Jimmy Buffett posters. I remember going into a hotel a few years ago, this little beach motel, and the guy's checking me in, and as he's going and like looking at the register, he was singing, Mother, Mother Ocean, the first line of A Pirate Looks at 40, and he's just everywhere, and especially in Key West. And, he lived in Key West for not that long, like maybe 3 to 5 years or something in the 70s. But like that was the period where he broke out and became a national name. And so he's kind of forever associated with Key West. And there was just something about seeing that kind of beach bum and snowbird Florida culture and soaking all that in that just really made me develop a real love for him. And also, listening to the albums more and more, I'm a kind of a music first person. I generally hear the melody and the arrangement and the hook, of a song before I really I might
Get to the lyrics.
before I get to the lyrics.
Yeah.
And I kept discovering that in his songs there would be these just really lyrical little images. I mean, Margaritaville has. I mean, it's the way it starts. It's like it's like the beginning of a short story. It's nibbling on sponge cake, watching the sun bake, all of those tourists covered in oil, strumming my six string on my front porch swing. I smell those shrimps, they're beginning to boil. And you're like, I know I have this guy's entire life. Like,
right.
This world has just unfolded.
You can smell it, you can taste it.
You can smell it, you can taste it. And
feel it, yeah.
And even this kind of, and I think that song has this thing you see a lot in Jimmy Buffett, which is this kind of wizened local, somebody who lives in a place that people vacation, observing the vacationers with a kind of mixture of like affection, empathy, and contempt. It's funny because the people who love Jimmy Buffett's music are kind of tourists, and if you hear how tourists are treated in his lyrics, it's not the most respectful. He's often observing kind of excessive or sort of pathetic behavior on the part of tourists who are coming to this kind of tropical paradise in their view, and I mean, and trying to kind of soak up a little bit of what's beautiful and magic about that place before heading back, to
the Midwest.
To the Midwest, exactly. And Jimmy Buffett is beloved in the Midwest, and I think actually it's no coincidence that I think my fandom for Jimmy Buffett, my appreciation really flourished when I lived in Chicago, and especially when I found myself really missing the ocean. And so many of his songs, have that that sense of yearning. There's a line. Let's see. I put this on a note. In changes in latitudes, changes in attitudes. So he sings, I think about Paris when I'm high on red wine. I wish I could jump on a plane. So many nights I just dream of the ocean. God, I wish I was sailing again. And just that, so many nights I dream of the ocean. God, I wish I was sailing again. And I am getting a little bit choked up. I know exactly what he feels. And that image of falling asleep, dreaming of the ocean, being landlocked somewhere. And, and there are people who don't need the ocean in their life. My friend Monica Eng, a former colleague, I remember she came back from New England a few years ago when we still worked at WBEZ. And she was like, yeah. It's kind of like Montrose Beach, except for gross and salty and smelly, and that is not me. I mean, it can be Maine in the winter, it can be Key West in the summer, it could be North Carolina, it could be California when the water's cold, it can be Florida when the water's warm. But I love the salt, I love the smell of the low tide, I love all the little creatures you find in the intertidal. I love surfing, I love fishing, I love just sitting in the ocean. And the characters in Jimmy Buffett songs have that same yearning. Yeah. And
for the salt water.
For the salt water, for the sea, for the laid back life. And many times the characters are separated from it. They're removed from it in some way, or they're seeking it. Fins is a song. Like, she came down here from Cincinnati. She spent 4 days on the train looking for some peace and quiet, hoped to see the sun again. It's a quest of this woman in Cincinnati to find that which is recreational and nourishing in the sun and in the salt water, and have some adventures. And I just think he narrates that beautifully. Yeah.
I have to say, I don't think much about Jimmy Buffett. Not that I think poorly of him. I just didn't. I was really, I knew Parrot Heads. I knew that his fandom, they're like Dave Matthews level fandom. They're it's like, I think it's comparable to Fish. I think it's
Grateful
comparable
Dead.
to Dave Matthews. And I would say the generational impact that I saw, like I mentioned to you, was on par with Prince. And I found that to me was shocking. How many young Gen Z, millennial, Gen X, boomer, that Jimmy Buffett really, I guess I must think of him as being boomer music.
Yeah.
And was really surprised. I mean, because he literally opened an active living retirement place and did a musical about opening a retirement home called Margaritaville.
Right.
And so I was really surprised by the diversity, I think, of fans. And because most of, right, like, I don't know if you ever listened to the podcast, My Brother and Me, but they are big Jimmy Buffett fans.
Oh, okay.
And they had him, they were such big fans, but like podcasts, parasocial relationships, it's all goofy, right? Mm-hmm. Lin-Manuel Miranda, big fan of My Brother and Me.
Mm-hmm.
And wrote them into Hamilton. Like, there's a line in Hamilton that is lifted from one of the bits in My Brother and Me.
Fascinating.
So the brothers in Mabim Bam love Jimmy Buffett. As Margaritaville is making its way to Broadway, Lin-Manuel, who's a fan of that podcast, makes an ask and gets Jimmy Buffett on their podcast to do advice, to give advice to listeners, and then gave them permission to come and record an episode on the red carpet of the premiere of Margaritaville.
I had no idea about any of this. I am familiar with My Brother and Me.
Yeah.
But I had no idea. It's interesting, though, Leah. I did have a kind of like Lin-Manuel Miranda story queued up to talk about. But I don't know. Before we move on, I just want to take a moment and imagine a hypothetical person who knows Jimmy Buffett as a musical theater songwriter first and foremost, and is sort of aware that maybe he has some other career beyond that. But he has written 2 or 3 musicals, including one adapted from a Herman Wouk novel too, or Wouk. I don't know how you say that writer's name. Yeah,
he wrote The Hope and the Glory.
Yeah, I mean, it's a part of him, and I don't know much about what he writes for musicals. For me, the version of Jimmy Buffett that I relate to is like the 1970s singer-songwriter. Actually, you mentioned Lin-Manuel Miranda. One of the things that you hear in Jimmy Buffett that I appreciate as a songwriter is he does a thing. You hear it a lot in the 1970s, which is internal and external rhyme schemes. This is getting kind of nerdy, but like, if you know the song Redheaded Stranger by Willie Nelson, it's like the chorus is, don't cross him, don't boss him, he's wild in his anger, riding and hiding his pain. Don't fight him, don't spite him, just wait for tomorrow, maybe he'll ride on again. And you get 2 internal rhymes and then an end rhyme, 2 internal rhymes, and then the last line rhymes with the first. That's very 1970s, and Jimmy does that a lot too in his lyrics. And so but Lin-Manuel Miranda, when he wrote Hamilton, I don't know if you've ever heard him tell this story, but the way he distinguished Hamilton as a rapper from the other founding fathers was, Hamilton in real life was a great writer, and he was a much better writer than his contemporaries. Yeah. And so Lin-Manuel Miranda wants to represent this in sort of lyricism and rapping ability. And so he has all the rappers, when Hamilton first kind of like walks into that tavern and sort of introduces himself, they're all rapping, but they're all just rhyming on the end line.
It's all very much, I'm Leah, right? My name is Leah, and I'm here to say, like, it's that, like, right? It's all very Hotel, Notel, Holiday Inn.
The Sugar Hill Gang, right?
It's very Sugar Hill Gang.
Rappers to like, yeah, exactly. And then he comes in and he's doing those internal rhymes, that a 70s sort of songwriter like Jimmy Buffett or Jerry Jeff Walker or Tom T. Hall or Willie Nelson, they were all kind of famous for that kind of rhyming. And then, it makes its way into rap in the late 1990s with lots, and now it's very, very common in hip hop. I
think it was like Eminem specifically. I think Hamilton was taking Eminem's style, and like Jefferson is bebop, and
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Eminem is,
Yeah.
let's see, everybody wants to discuss me. That must mean I'm disgusting, but it's just me. I'm just cussing. You know,
Yes.
that like
Yeah.
everything rhymes with the last thing, but that's all one line. You know,
Yeah.
and the ability to break the line down into lots of little rhymes. And yeah, absolutely. That's Hamilton. We're talking
Yeah.
about Hamilton and Jimmy Buffett.
Two great tastes that go great together.
Apparently, Lin-Manuel Miranda thinks so.
Yeah. I'm going in November to see Hamilton again. I'm very excited.
I saw it twice in Chicago, that first run.
Saw it many more times. I've seen it.
Is it the same cast? Or is there a new cast?
No, it's a tour. It's a touring cast. So Miguel, who was our Hamilton, is on Broadway now.
Mm-hmm. He was great.
He was amazing. I don't actually know who's in this tour, and I'm really excited because
I'm trying to remember.
Like
there
8
was
or 9.
The guy, when I saw it the first time, the person I was most blown away, I believe, was the understudy who did Jefferson. And I can't remember who that guy was, but I remember being like, whoa, who is this person? And remember, Jefferson plays two different, it's Lafayette in the first act and Jefferson in the second act too. And I got to remember who that was because I just, and then I watched it the second time and he was in another role. He also killed it, but it wasn't that role. And the regular Jefferson came back, and I'm trying to remember who that was. But yeah, the Chicago cast was amazing. I'm sure the New York cast was fine, but the
Chicago cast was better. So I saw
the
original
first,
cast.
Folks. On Finding Favorites,
the original cast.
Leah thinks the Chicago cast was better.
I do. Josh Henry was the best Burr there ever was, and I saw the original cast in New York. I've seen it on the West End, and then I've seen it like 6 or 7 times in Chicago.
Can I say I'm still a Chicagoan. Our George Washington was amazing too.
Yes, he was fantastic.
Yeah. It's been a few years now. This is all foggy. I'm reaching deep into my memories.
Yeah, but they're coming back, and I took my nephews when it first opened in Chicago. So my youngest nephew Quinn was 6 when I took him the first time, and he's 14 now. Or he was maybe 7 then. But my sister was like, she was like, he's still obsessed with Hamilton, and I think he'll understand more this time. So
yeah, that's exciting.
It'll be fun.
That's very exciting.
Yeah.
Hamilton forever.
Yeah. Okay.
I can suggest a topic if you want, because we've gone in lots of directions, or you can continue. Maybe were you bringing up Lin-Manuel Miranda for a particular reason apart from that anecdote?
No, it was just that anecdote, which is to me was realizing like this is he's a sweet guy. Like
yeah.
Jimmy Buffett was a sweet person who was good to his fans. He didn't like if you're an asshole musician, you're not going to go on the Bim Bam and have a sense of humor about it.
Yeah.
And it really kind of I felt like it gave me some appreciation of him that I didn't have before. That's all.
I think that his personality is warm and generous. And I think it doesn't, I don't know. The analog I have. I mean, Prince, man, it's hard for me to imagine that the death of Jimmy Buffett had the same impact as the death of Prince. Although, maybe. To me, the person he kind of reminds me of in this regard is John Prine. Who we also lost, who was somebody who, like Jimmy Buffett, never had a big hit.
Right.
Jimmy Buffett didn't really ever have a big hit. I think he had novelty songs like we talked about. And then I think, Come Monday might have been 24 on the charts, and Margaritaville was like 30 something. And, his career was sputtering into the 90s when Alan Jackson did that 5 O'Clock Somewhere song. And then that was a huge hit. I think that was a bigger hit than any of Jimmy Buffett's actual songs.
Was it a cover?
It was a duet. It was a duet.
Okay.
was a duet. So it's mostly Alan Jackson, but Jimmy Buffett comes in on the chorus. And there's the moment that Jimmy Buffett comes in, the Alan Jackson, I can't remember, but the rhyme is something like, I could pay off my tab. It's the bridge. I could pay off my tab, pour myself in a cab, and get back to work before 2. At a moment like this, I can't help but wonder, what would Jimmy Buffett do? And then you hear Jimmy, funny you should ask, Alan. And then he sings the next chorus. Pour me something tall and strong, make it a hurricane before I go. And then they just kind of sing out the end of that chorus, and then they're kind of bantering back and forth. And, Alan, I've been to Margaritaville. Oh, you been to Margaritaville? Got to just keep it between the navigational buoy. They have a great sort of end of song kind of bantering moment. And I think that brought Jimmy to the younger country generation a little bit. And it also kind of reminded people that he really got his start as a Nashville country musician.
Yeah.
Even though his hits were sort of either in easy listening or rock and roll. But I think it's one of those things that because he did so many live shows and because those were so entertaining, and then stories like mine, where I think people, I would say, I don't know what the right word for it is, but I write songs. It's not a professional thing I do. I guess you would call it an avocation. I take it as seriously as something that I do professionally, but I don't make a living at it. And so I think anybody who's that into music, either as a musical critic or as a musician who plays in a band or someone tries to write songs, eventually you realize strip away the sunglasses and the straw hat and the Hawaiian shirt, and you've got a really good musician and a really good songwriter here who, in his songwriting, it's not obfuscatory, right? It is. I was thinking about David Berman of Silver Jews recently, and they are like polar. Both songwriters I love. They're polar opposites. Like a David Berman Silver Jews song, you don't really know what it's about, but you sense there's some meaning there. Mm-hmm. And with Jimmy Buffett, you know what every song's about. Like he has a song called "I Found Me a Home." It's about finding a home. He has a song. Come Monday, it's about like this weekend I have to work, but come Monday I'm going to be with my girlfriend and I'll be happy again. The songs are exactly, or at least the story of the songs is not hard to parse. Yeah. Where the depth comes, I think, though, is, when I was telling you earlier about like, you realize in some of the lyrics, there's this sort of sense of melancholy and observation and longing, that even though it's sort of the Bruce Springsteen thing, like the mood of it feels very celebratory, but after you read the lyrics, you're like, oh, this is kind of melancholy. I mean, Margaritaville is a song about a guy who's depressed, drinking himself to death, and or maybe it's a guy having a bad week who's going to pull himself out of it. But it's played for humor, from his affect, you wouldn't think of them as sad songs, but then there's something about the way he uses his voice in his performance. I mean, the other thing too, I'm not a great singer. I never thought of him as a very good singer, but try to sing some of his songs. I recently tried to make a recording of this song he did called "In the Shelter," and it was really hard to sing. And he doesn't.
Does he have a surprising range? Does it that he's...
It's not the range. He doesn't have much of a range. It's all I can say. I'm not a great singer, so I'll try to explain this the best I can. But the chord that is being played in this particular melodic line is an E minor chord, and then he goes from the minor third of that chord, which would be the G, to an F sharp, which is the second, which is in the key, but it's a hard interval to hit. I don't know why. I've taken some voice lessons over the years, but I just couldn't, and he makes it, eventually I think I was able to do it, but it was really, really hard, and he makes it sound really easy. And his singing, it's not like he doesn't necessarily project that much. He doesn't hit really high notes, but he has a kind of like weathered ease to his singing, and it makes it, I think, actually, like the adjective you might apply to Jimmy Buffett in many, 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 many aspects of his life is deceptively, and he's a deceptively good singer. It doesn't seem like it's all that great until you try to do it, and you realize, oh yeah, he's good at that.
That he secretly studied music theory and has
studied it, or just worked
Picked
it
it
out
up.
on the road.
Yeah.
I mean, he was a late bloomer too, and so he made his living as a musician for like a decade, just like as a kind of coffeehouse folk singer before he ever was household name. And yeah, I don't know how he I don't know why he's good at that. I don't know if he figured it out or studied music theory
Yeah.
or it's talent. I don't, it's part of the mystique.
Yeah. So one of the things that you mentioned, you sent me a list of subtopics.
Yeah.
And one is like the maybe not quite controversies, but the things that you've struggled with in your fandom.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and maybe it should be more controversial.
Right.
Like I almost feel like he gets away with some things that maybe he shouldn't. Yeah, I mean, the Jimmy Buffett dilemma is the way that I think about it. And it's I mean, this is also one of the things that I think many people find off-putting about him. And especially, I went and saw one of his shows at Wrigley Field in 2017, and I had a great time. It was a great show. Very white audience. Not a lot of non-white people there. And that in of itself is not an inherent critique, but I think maybe non-white people might see, might be a little bit more off-put by the way in which he may be appropriating, sort of Caribbean culture and the way that his song, it's not necessarily himself, the human being, but the way that his brand kind of treats the Caribbean.
Sure. I'll say when I was surprised by the diversity. It was the age diversity of his fans, not not like race or it was more like, wow, young people and boomers, like everybody likes Jimmy Buffett. But you're right, it is a white crowd that wears sombreros and
there's a kind of smushing together of Caribbean culture with South American culture, with Mexican culture, with Hawaiian culture.
It's like resort culture.
Yeah, and this sort of like straw hut tiki drink that all of these places that are, tropical and have the ocean and are probably poorer than the United States and are probably largely occupied by black and brown people and that have been subject to oppression, sometimes from the United States, sometimes from global capitalism, are just kind of like fun paradise places for white people to go on vacation. And that they are not, that whatever makes a place like Antigua distinct from St. Bart's, from Key West, from Hawaii, it's all kind of lost in that. The song Kokomo, which is a song I like by the Beach Boys, also does that. It like literally just smushes all of those places into one fictitious place, Kokomo, which we all know the real Kokomo is in Indiana.
Yes.
But
as a kid growing up in Indiana, that song was always very funny.
It's very confusing, right? Like, why do all these people
all these beautiful places,
and you go to Kokomo? Yeah,
you go to Holiday World.
Yeah, exactly. So, but it sounds Hawaiian, but we're not talking about Kokomo right now. I mean, and that is, I think, the effect that his song, and I think especially also his sort of like licensing agreements, all the brands like the Margaritaville restaurants and the, Margaritaville dry rub and the Lost Shaker of Salt brand salt and all of these other things that he's put his name on, and in some cases actually been involved in the businesses. They have that effect of kind of othering Caribbean Caribbean and Mexican and South American and Tahitian and Hawaiian and Pacific Island culture and Florida and Haitian, all these different things. And I think I've been sailing in the Caribbean and I have seen, I've been on a little sailboat that my friend owned, and I've observed the giant cruise ships that go there. And first of all, like, not judging anybody who goes on a cruise, like if you want to go on a cruise, go on a cruise. That industry is harmful to the Caribbean. It is extractive. it makes a lot of money for the companies that run these tours, and the locals who live there don't get much benefit out of it. Maybe they sell some tourism dollars, but it
Right.
also kind of like whatever is sort of distinctive about each of those islands is kind of smushed together, and you get these like little like cruise ports where the same factory made trinkets and the same tequila and rum spots and the same pink and yellow and turquoise hotels are built to custom to to serve to the same people. And I think it's actually destructive to that culture, and I think it others it, and I think that Jimmy Buffett is complicit in all of that. And I think the other side of it, though, there's this great article in the New York Times called "Jimmy Buffett Does Not Live the Jimmy Buffett Lifestyle," written by Taffy Brodesser Ackner.
Yeah.
Great article. I'm going to read you a quote from it if I can.
All right. Of course.
Because that in a coconut shell, by the way, this article is so well written. Because that in a coconut shell was the problem. Jimmy Buffett is not really Jimmy Buffett anymore. He hasn't been for a while. Jimmy Buffett, the nibbling on sponge cake, watching the sun bake, getting drunk and screwing. It's 5 o'clock somewhere. Jimmy Buffett has been replaced with a well-preserved businessman who is leveraging the Jimmy Buffett of yore in order to keep the Jimmy Buffett of now in the manner to which the old Jimmy Buffett never dreamed he could become accustomed.
Yeah.
And therein lies the Margaritaville, trademark, mesquite barbecue rub. The more successful you become at selling the Jimmy Buffett lifestyle, the less you are seen as believably living the Jimmy Buffett lifestyle. And at somewhere along the line, he became this incredibly successful lifestyle brand businessman. And, from what I've read, he had a really rough time in the music industry. His first record was a flop. It sold something like 200 copies. His second record, the record company that recorded it didn't like it, and they pretended to lose it. And it was like, and then that's kind of when he went to Key West, and he was, this was in his 20s, and even in that time, he was a good enough musician that he could make a living as a kind of touring musician. He could perform bars but he worked on a yacht in that period. He became a newspaper reporter. Somewhere during this time, he spent several months in Chicago and was a regular at the Quiet Night, which is the same club where John Prine used to perform.
Wow.
There's a photo of him on one of the early Steve Goodman records. He's on the cover because he just was part of the scene back then. And this is kind of when he puts together his distinct sound, kind of merging country and rock with some of the Caribbean sounds that he was inspired by, reggae and calypso and steel drum, all of that stuff. And, he was having a really rough time of it and, got kind of jerked around by the record companies. And so that's early on, he decided he was going to kind of take over his own business whenever possible, so he started his own record company. He made his own tour bus, and then he started making other tour buses and rented them to others. He started his own merch company. He had a lot of friends, and they were like, hey, what if we started a bar? How if we started a restaurant? And he was, and so, in the 80s, he was constantly starting these businesses, and he was trying to seize control of his life. That, he describes the kind of relationship he had with the record companies in the 70s as indentured servitude, and I think that's fair. Those record deals were terrible. And so he had this impulse to kind of start businesses and take control of his own destiny. But I think at some point, I don't know what happened. I wonder, did it become like an addiction? He's worth over $1 billion, I think.
I'm sure.
Or maybe only several $100 million. But it's, it is kind of absurd. And I think a lot of those businesses, they all kind of slot into that kind of like Royal Caribbean, Disney cruise ship flattening of the Caribbean.
There's sort of a level at which he's like on par with Martha Stewart for a lifestyle brand, right?
Great example. Yeah. I think that's right. And And yeah, it's kind of messed up, and it makes me want to be like, why, man? Like, just go surfing and like write some songs. Like,
Yeah.
after you make your first 2 million, isn't that enough? Like,
Yeah.
and you can just make a living. And I don't understand it. I don't understand why he had that drive to be a businessman. I mean, I think, obviously it served him well in his younger days when he needed to seize control of his life and when
Yeah.
he needed that entrepreneurial spirit. But it seems like for some reason, he couldn't stop. I wish I had had a chance to meet him and ask him about that. I think it would have been a great interview. But
Yeah.
I also think I also think it's just like worth saying, like, I don't think that attitude I'm describing towards the Caribbean is his attitude. Like, he reads books and he has been to all these little islands. He understands the difference between Jamaican culture and Trinidadian culture and
Yeah.
I mean, and when I saw him, like, his backing band, like, they had an entire like Trinidadian steel drum band, like 20 people at one point. And, he's given a lot of Caribbean musicians jobs. He celebrated that music. He understands it really well. He's done a lot also, I think, positive for like those cultures too. Like he after the Haitian earthquake, he flew his seaplane there and like built tents and housing for people who needed it. So,
Wow.
it's anyway, it's not all that. I don't feel like he's only been destructive. I think it's complicated, but I do think, I do think I think there's something to criticize about Jimmy Buffett's business trajectory. And I think it has done some harm in that sense. And I think that's kind of sad and too bad.
Yeah. It's when you were describing some of, like, he made his own tour bus and then he made tour buses for other people. It reminded me of Steve-O from Jackass, who, after he got sober, realized, oh, like, I can't do skateboarding and Jackass stunts for the rest of my life. Like,
you'll die.
Your body's going to give out.
Yep.
And so he has warehouses, he has merch companies, he does drop shipping. So like all of the comedians that have come in and out of Jackass use his companies for all the back end business stuff. And
right.
he is, I don't remember what interview I listened to or read about him because it's fascinating. But also his public persona, like when you read, I think his dad was like the CEO of Ford in Argentina. Like he kind of he grew up in international schools, really privileged.
Yeah, I had no idea.
Yeah.
I just remember he was, when I watched Jackass as a 22-year-old, he was always the one who took the most abuse, right? Like he was the one who got stung in the face by the jellyfish and then used his own urine to neutralize the sting.
Yes. He is still the one who takes the most abuse, and
which,
now he's
by the way,
sober.
doesn't work. Don't pee on your jellyfish stings. We have learned that ammonia does not neutralize jellyfish stings.
Okay.
I don't remember what does work, but not urine.
Not going in the ocean helps.
Yeah, well, I mean, yeah, but that's not an option for some of us.
I know.
I saw something. I saw a big fin the other day in Maine when I was surfing. I think it was a seal. I hope. Which isn't really any more reassuring than seeing a shark, because whenever there are seals, there are sharks. But anyway, that's an aside.
Seals have fins?
It was like their back. It was like the back.
Like the tail,
the foot.
Okay.
Which looks like a fish's fin. But
okay.
Right, it's not technically a fin. It's more like
okay.
a vestigial flipper.
Yeah.
Foot thing. I don't know what I'm sure some biologist knows. Yeah, that's interesting about Steve. I mean, I think this happens to a lot of successful artists and musicians, which is they want to seize some control of the business, or they realize like the deal they have that got them started isn't very good, and so they build some kind of business entity or DIY entity, and then sometimes that can kind of take over.
Yeah.
And I mean, like, I don't know. I mean, Jimmy Buffett, I hope that in his later years, he still got to go sailing and surfing and, hang out. And I think he did. I think that he tried. I think he would work very hard while he was working, and then,
play very hard.
Play very hard or relax very hard while he was relaxing. But, it is, he had like 5 houses. It just seems like, I don't know. I don't know how he did all that. Plus, he was always working on something.
Right.
I don't get it. And it to each their own, right? Like if that's the way he wants to live, that's the way he wants to live. But I think that Jimmy Buffett could have used his power and influence to maybe push for. He did do conservation work in the Caribbean and in the
Yeah.
Gulf Coast, and that's important work that he did. And he also did some, like anti-hate, like pro-LGBTQ work, like actually going way back to the 1970s
Yeah.
too. But I think I would have liked to have seen a Jimmy Buffett who it could have maybe been a force for. Let's not turn the Caribbean into a gigantic playground for white people for the
Yeah.
sake of big American corporations. I think he could have done more good in that department, and I wish he had.
I wonder what his, estate, what decisions his kids will make, or grandkids, whoever the estate is passed on to, with his like licensing and all of that.
Yeah, it's a really good question. One person I find really fascinating is his younger daughter, Delaney Buffett, who is quite young, or relatively younger than us, born in the 90s, I think. And she, maybe late 80s, but she, interesting story with Jimmy Buffett. He and his wife separated in the early 80s because they were kind of too much partying, too much alcohol. I'm not sure. I think kind of like they both decided they were bad for each other in that regard, if that makes sense. And then they got back together something like 8 or 10 years later, and and then they stayed married for the rest of his life. Kind of a lovely, beautiful story. And Delaney, the younger kid, was born after they got back together, I think.
Okay.
And she is a filmmaker, and during the pandemic, just made this. I mentioned this earlier, but this would be a good place to start for anybody who's sort of interested in kind of like another side of Jimmy Buffett, than Margaritaville, and Cheeseburger in Paradise. She just recorded. He on social media asked his fans to request songs that he would perform, on YouTube or whatever. Remember the early days of the pandemic when everybody was like doing stuff on YouTube? So he was like, what are some requests that I don't do enough in concert? And so all of these requests came in for essentially non-hits that were favorites.
Nice.
And he ended up turning this into an album called Songs You Don't Know by Heart. His big greatest hits record from probably mid 80s was Songs You Know by Heart. So it's the non-hits, and maybe no coincidence, it's a lot of songs that I like on this collection, including the song he wrote about his daughter, Delaney Talks to Statues, which is a song that always brings a tear to my eye, and it's super simple. But it's just a beautiful image of a dad watching his little toddler daughter toddle around. And Delaney talks to statues and dances beside the pool. What is it? She chases cats in Roman ruins and stops on old toadstools. Just this little image of this little girl like stomping around, chasing cats, talking to the statues in Rome, So, Delaney, all grown up, got him to record several of these songs in these really simply recorded video interviews. They're all on YouTube, and he just tells the story of the song, and they banter a little bit. He does that song, Delaney Talks to Statues, and gets her to be like, you remember Rome? Do you remember Miami? That was Jane Foster's pool. And they kind of go back and forth, and she's like, what year did you write Cowboy in the Jungle? And he's like, is this a quiz? I think that was probably A1A. Nope, Son of a Sailor. So they're kind of bantering back and forth. And then he performs the song in this like really stripped down, just acoustic guitar. And you kind of get a sense of him as like the 1970s folky that he was, you know. And the songs are beautiful. And, because he's with his daughter, he's less guarded, and I feel like he's not branding. He's not doing the branding thing.
Right.
He's being a little more authentic. Even like other interviews, you always get the sense that he's kind of like, I'm Jimmy Buffett, like he's kind of doing the Jimmy Buffett thing, and you see a little bit more of just this, old man with a lot of stories to tell,
right.
And I think those videos are really beautiful and worth checking out, and a good antidote to the Margaritaville dry rub / flattening of the Caribbean into one, magical paradisical place for white people to have vacation side of Jimmy Buffett.
And there was so much of artists and musicians in particular trying to keep performing so they could get some audience reaction, a little bit of the dopamine,
attention,
attention,
something to do better than getting drunk and passing out. Especially for a lot of sober musicians, that must have been really hard.
Yeah.
And some of those performances are great. And I mean, I don't think they would have been nearly as good if it weren't Delaney, behind the camera. I think she does a great job, but also just the fact that she's the little daughter, she's the younger daughter. I think daughters and dads have a kind of, there's a special sort of relationship between daughters and dads, and especially the baby in the family. And I think she works that very effectively in those videos too. And it's very charming. And I find them very comforting, and the weekend he died, I watched many of them, I think they're a gift for anybody who was affected by his departure.
Mm-hmm. I will make sure that I link out to those, to the YouTube, and
maybe you can get Delaney Buffett to talk about her favorite things.
Yeah, maybe.
I don't think she is more famous than me, but not as famous as Jimmy. I mean, these videos didn't get that much attention. They did fine. And that album, I suppose, did okay. But you look at the videos and it's like 50,000 views, and you're like, this is Jimmy Buffett. Like, how many people have watched? We could look this up right now. But I would get So actually, you want to do Price is Right? How many people have watched Alan Jackson's 5 o'clock somewhere video? Yeah, guess before we. Yeah.
Oh wait, how many people have watched it? Or
yeah,
how many
like
views
on
YouTube?
How many views on YouTube do you think? I don't know the answer. We'll look it up.
I'm gonna say like 48 million.
Jeez. Okay. I don't think it's quite that high, but Price is Right. I don't remember the Price is Right rule, but I'll say 24 million.
Okay, closest without going over.
Yeah, so I probably should have said 47 million. That would have been better strategy, but I'm not going to say that because I want you to have just a good chance. All right, so here we go. YouTube, Alan Jackson, 5. It's a pretty good video. I don't know if you've seen it.
Not recently. I'm sure I've seen it.
Official HD video. 85 million views. You win.
Boom.
But we were both off by
50. I was off by 50%. You
were off
double
by
it.
40 million.
Yeah.
What? So 40 million, 85 million people apparently have watched 5 o'clock somewhere. And don't get me wrong, it's a great video, but only something like 35,000 people have watched Delaney Buffett interviewing Jimmy Buffett about Delaney Talks to Statues, which I would say is, if I could only choose one, I would choose the latter. Let's see how many people. Delaney Talks to Statues, directed by Delaney, 51,000 views. That's pretty good. But anyway, my point is that these videos are pretty amazing. And like a lot of things in Jimmy Buffett's life, there are these like hidden treasures, and there's a lot of his story that I don't think is even nobody's written a biography. When was he in Chicago? When was he at the Quiet Night in a residency? He mentioned that in one of those videos. I didn't know that. I knew he was friends with Steve Goodman because he's on that album cover, and because apparently, actually, former Cubs, or no, sorry, WGN executive named Dan Filato told me that, a few years ago, I did a story about Go Cubs Go, that song for Curious City. And after that came out, this guy, Dan Filato, got in touch with me. I hope I'm saying his name correctly. He's a Chicago guy full of stories. And he said that Jimmy Buffett was instrumental in convincing Steve Goodman's widow to let the Cubs continue to use that song, Go Cubs Go.
Wow.
And of course, that's become iconic now. And, you have Wrigley Field in 2016 and everybody singing that song
Right.
and crying, and, 2 million people singing it in Grant Park at the Victory Parade. And so apparently Jimmy Buffett is part of that story too.
Huh. Well, maybe Delaney has recordings. Hopefully she didn't publish everything.
Yeah. And there is no, I don't think there's any really good biography of Jimmy Buffett. And, like musician biographies can be really bad or often, I should say that they can often be kind of mediocre.
Yeah.
But I think it's a fascinating story, and he was a late bloomer. He kind of seized his own business. His career largely felt like it was over by the 90s. And then, I think you're right about observing that many, many, many more people were affected by his death than one might think. That he had one of those kind of, similar to John Prine, kind of, he didn't have huge success as a young person, but his success continued to build upon itself and build and build.
Yeah.
And he got passed down in generations. It's probably like my ex-girlfriend's story of her dad playing that old Son of a Sailor tape in the Jeep Cherokee and picking her up. I think there are probably a lot of people, who got it from their goofy dad, and Dad, why do we have to listen to Jimmy Buffett, and then after a while you're sort of like, well, I do like that one song.
Yeah. He wasn't, because my dad got sober when I was 6. So Jimmy Buffett, we did not listen to Jimmy Buffett.
Yeah. There's a lot of glorification of the boozy lifestyle.
Yeah.
Yep. That might be another source of harm too.
Yeah.
I think Jimmy Buffett, in his final years was quite sober as well. I don't think he was 100% sober, but I think
maybe
it's
California sober.
I think he drank on Sundays or something like that. Yeah. What's California sober? I've never heard that. That sounds like fun.
California sober is no booze, just weed.
Oh, yeah. Well, I believe he did enjoy gummies until the very end.
Yeah. So he, in 1998, published a memoir, A Pirate Looks at 50.
Which is hard to find.
Yeah.
And I'm pretty sure my grandmother had a copy of it. I looked for it on Amazon, and it was like, it's out of print. But I also think it's a memoir, but my understanding is that it's more of a collection of anecdotes than a really comprehensive biography, too. So I think, and there was another one later called Tales from Margaritaville.
Yeah.
But I think I don't know that anybody's ever really assembled all the bits and pieces of Flotsam and Jetsam and Detritus that is the story of Jimmy Buffett. And I think it's a fascinating American story I think that would be worth telling. Oh, by the way, anybody out there who has a book publishing company, if you want to hire me to write that biography, I would seriously consider. I would take a meeting.
And in the 1980s, became a shareholder in Berkshire Hathaway with Warren Buffett, no relation.
Yeah, but they took DNA tests because they were. Did they? They did, because they were both such successful businessmen that people were wondering if there was some kind of like successful businessman gene that they had in common. So they took DNA tests, but they're not related.
But I also think if you meet Warren Buffett in the 80s and he is whispering business advice in your ear, that also explains the relentless pursuit of growth and licensing.
Yeah, I mean, come on, Jimmy. Rest in peace. You hate to speak ill of the dead, but what was motive? I mean, how much money do you need? I mean, how many boats do you need? How many seaplanes do you need? How many houses do you need? I don't understand that aspect of him. And often it's our strengths also are our weaknesses too, and I think that's an example of that. But it also, I mean, I have no idea, but, he drank a lot. I think I suspect there was speed and cocaine in the 70s, and certainly,
Yeah.
marijuana. I wonder if the business thing is also sort of an addictive behavior for some
I
people
think it could be.
too.
Yeah.
No, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'm just speculating, and I don't have any evidence for that, but I guess I don't understand that drive, especially for somebody who his entire brand is built around relaxing in the good life, and that was authentic, right? Like
Right.
he is somebody who loves the ocean and loves sailing and loves fishing. Why not just do that for the last 30 years of his life?
Yeah.
And I don't know. I wish I could have asked him that. Maybe there would have been an answer that would have surprised me, and maybe he would have had something interesting to say about that.
Yeah.
Maybe he had some master plan to use the money for some good purpose, that
Right.
his children are going to enact, or
Yeah.
or maybe it just is too fun, to make money, and you can't stop.
Yeah. Is there anything else about Jimmy? I mean, I feel like there's a lot more about Jimmy Buffett.
Oh yeah.
But what, like, is there one last topic you want to make sure we cover?
Well, there was nothing else that I absolutely had to, but I did think that if anybody listened to this, I suggested the Delaney interviews, Jimmy Buffett videos. I think if you search for directed by Delaney, I think that's how you could find those videos. But maybe just a recommendation for somebody who thinks they don't like Jimmy Buffett, like some songs to start with. For me, A Pirate Looks at 40, and Delaney Talks to Statues, and, really Margaritaville. But I think those three all just like punch me right in the gut. So that, that might be a place to start. Actually, do you have a favorite Jimmy Buffett song?
I don't know if I do.
Do you? I mean, you're familiar with the hits, I assume, or do you have any of his albums?
I don't have any of his albums, but almost every song you sang or mentioned, I was like, oh, I do know that. I feel like when I saw the Carole King musical Beautiful, every single song I was like, she wrote that one. She wrote that one too. She wrote, right?
Yeah.
And I feel like Jimmy Buffett is the same, right?
Yeah,
that
like Come Monday, right? Like is just this like
Right.
70s AM radio hit that you've heard like
million
probably
times.
in your hindbrain when you were being driven around in a station wagon when you were 4.
It was a Pinto.
Sorry.
Station wagon.
Oh, it
We
was
weren't
a station
fancy.
wagon.
It was. I mean, yeah, it was a wagon, but it wasn't like one with like wood paneling or anything. It was a Pinto.
Yeah.
And then I think I have to remind myself that the pineapple pina colada song is not his.
No, it's not his. Yeah, and it's interesting. I don't know that I can't really imagine him. That song, it plays out in a very, I don't know. It doesn't feel to me like a Jimmy Buffett song, even though it has the line, "Do you like pina coladas?"
Right.
But it's an interesting little story. And yeah, it's not his. I forget who did that song. I'm sure we could look it up.
Yeah.
I do. I can give you one final thought here, which is, okay, so there's a song called Cowboy in the Jungle, and that song is this sort of story song about this guy it's based on a friend of his who was a cowboy who he went sailing with. And there's just, at one point, it's sort of fictitious, but this guy is a cowboy, but he gets stranded in Panama, so he's just kind of like hanging out, watching the tourists. And he has this line. It's this what I was talking about earlier, that sort of observation. And he talks about, like, I mean, it's maybe a little bit insulting, like the women all sitting around in muumuus, and trying all the tropical drinks, and then their husbands, I forget the line. It's sort of like they're basically just talking about fishing, and they say something like, they talk about who caught what and who sat on his butt, but it's the only game in town. And then he says they're trying to drink all the punches. They all may lose their lunches, trying to cram lost years into 5 or 6 days. And that is another one of those lines, a bunch of tourists sitting around, drinking rum drinks, talking about fishing. And that line, it's funny, it's weird, but trying to cram lost years into 5 or 6 days.
Yeah.
It's like in the middle of this kind of goofy song, that line always just reaches in my heart and squeezes it. And I'm like, I know exactly.
Yeah, the next verse is like, definitely for you. I don't want to live on that kind of island. No, I don't want to swim in a roped off sea. Too much for me. Too much for me. I've got to be where the wind and the water are free.
Yeah. 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 And it's weird because he goes from third person observing somebody to the first person. And even though he says the cowboy in the jungle is this other guy, at that moment, you sort of think, well, maybe Jimmy Buffett's the cowboy in the jungle here too. The other thing that's kind of really neat about that, what I just read you, drink all the punches, they all may lose their lunches, trying to cram lost years into 5 or 6 days. This gets back into what we were talking about with Eminem, Hamilton, that's the second chorus.
Rhymes, yeah.
The first chorus is roll with the punches, play all of his hunches, make the best whatever came his way. So the second chorus rhymes with the first chorus, which was like a minute and a half ago in the song. It has the same meter, it has the same rhyme, and some part of your brain remembers that, even though he wrote completely different set of lyrics and imagery and rhyme. But yeah, I think that's beautiful. And yes, I do also I don't want to live in a roped off sea. I want to be where the wind and the water are free. Yeah. And thank you, Jimmy, for reminding me of that.
Well, Jesse, thank you so much for coming back on the podcast.
Oh, my pleasure.
Where can people follow you online these days?
Oh, you know what? I just joined Blue Sky. I think it's just Jesse Dukes there. I think you could Google me. I'm still on Twitter, and I still call it Twitter. That would be Curious Dukes.
Yep.
And I'm something on Instagram. I think JP Dukes 9. And you can also check out Upper Middle Brow at uppermiddlebrow.com. And I think we're at Upper Middle Pod and Twitter. You can find it on the other places. I don't need to tell you about all the different places to find, but do check out Upper Middle Brow. And yeah, I don't know what to add to that. That's where you can find me. Oh, you know where else you can find me that's new since the last time we talked is jessedukes.com. All
right. What's happening at jessedukes.com?
jessedukes.com is more of a professional website. I'm a writer, podcast producer, and editor, and I'm available to help people with their writing and podcasting projects. And so you can check out my portfolio and get in touch with me and see some of the stuff that I've worked on, and also kind of get a sense of the various kinds of professional work that I do, and whether you might want to hire me to help you with something creative that you're working on.
Outstanding.
And if I'm not the right person for you, if you get in touch, I'll try to help you think through who would be a better person to work with you on your creative thing. So I love inquiries.
Nice.
I'm being kind of Jimmy Buffett right here. You can also find me at the Jesse Dukes restaurant, I don't know what it would be called, like camper vans on Navy Pier.
Taking over the Bubba Gump Shrimp House.
Taking over the Bubba. Yeah. Camper vans. No, I don't have a lifestyle brand yet. I'll think about that, but I think I need more than like 50 followers before I do that.
Well, they're just the early adopters.
Yeah, exactly. They're like the 520 people who bought Jimmy Buffett's very first album in 1971. Yeah. They were ahead of their time. Yeah, thanks. Thanks so much, Leah. This was really, really, really fun. I hope it was useful for you. And I don't know, actually I should ask you, like, are you pro Jimmy, anti Jimmy? Jimmy curious, where do you sit in all this? And,
No,
and have I moved the needle for you in any particular way?
Oh, I'm definitely going to listen to these like daddy daughter make them cry video songs. I know those will wreck me.
Yeah.
No, like I think Jimmy Buffett is like always a good time.
Yeah.
But he's not one of the like 6 CDs I have in my car, and he's not a podcast. So it's just I don't have Spotify, so I don't have. If I listen to music in my car, I'm listening to like the country station or the 90s station, or I have like one of 5 mixed CDs. So and nobody's put Jimmy Buffett on them.
Yeah. You might hear, let's see, I think Kenny Chesney, Brad Paisley, Zach Brown all have kind of like Jimmy Buffett collaborations you might hear from time to time on country radio. And of course, 5 o'clock somewhere.
Yeah. So I'm I think he's fun. I think he's a good call at a karaoke bar. Like if you want to lead a sing along, you pick a Jimmy Buffett song, right?
Yep.
And I guess I will just always think of him as being a good sport because he was of what a good sport he was on My Brother and Me.
I think
it's a weird way to access a celebrity is through, like they don't do celebrity interviews on that podcast like this, but occasionally celebrities will come on. And by that, I mean Lin-Manuel Miranda
and Jimmy
Buffett. So it's just like, I guess I just feel like, oh, he's a good sport. And I like that. I like it when celebrities turn out not to be total fucking assholes.
Yeah.
So I like that about him.
Honestly, if it weren't too late in the case of Jimmy Buffett, I would say that Lin-Manuel Miranda and Jimmy Buffett would probably be in my top 10 celebrities that I would like to invite onto my podcast.
Yeah.
Too. Also, another too late would have been Johnny Cash and John Prine.
Yeah.
I have to think about who the others would be. But yeah, I do think that charm and that quality, I mean, he could put it on and sort of turn it off, but I do think that was an authentic aspect of who he was. And, you can see it with Delaney in those videos too.
Yeah.
And you should also check out Little Miss Magic if you want another. That's the First Daughter song, and it's also quite lovely too. So you just kind of mainline the father-daughter songs.
Yeah.
And yeah, they are quite moving. But yeah, thanks for letting me talk about Saint Buffett, Senator Buffett. Jimmy, I don't even know what his last name is. Jimmy Tiberius Buffett. We should figure this out. And
Let's see.
What is
William? James William Buffett.
Thanks for allowing me to talk about James William Buffett on Finding Favorites. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you so much. You can find Finding Favorites on Instagram and Twitter, Finding Faves Pod. Please rate and review on Apple Podcasts or Good Pods. Leave a review. If it's important for the big podcasts, it's triply important for the small podcasts, for independent podcasts looking for their audiences. And today, the day of this record, we found out that the FDA has approved this fall's group of COVID boosters.
Yay.
So get your flu shot, get your COVID booster, and keep enjoying your favorite things.
Get your flu shot and get your COVID booster. I was not very good at getting my flu shot before we had a pandemic, and it took that stupid pandemic for me to realize I was being really stupid about that and selfish and thinking that the flu shot was designed to protect me, but no, it's designed to create group immunity and herd immunity and protect the beloved elders and other vulnerable people, the other vulnerable people in our life.
Yeah.
So
it's
I
also
agree
nice
with that.
Not to get the flu.
It's also very nice not to get the flu too. You know what's not nice? Getting the flu.
Thank you for listening to Finding Favorites with Leah Jones. Please make sure to subscribe and drop us a 5-star review on iTunes. Now, go out and enjoy your favorite things.